Welcome to the Inclusive Fitness Podcast, where we speak with self-advocates, caregivers, professionals, and other leading thinkers and doers who are working to shift the paradigm in how we think about and support creating healthy lifestyles for people who are neurodivergent, have intellectual disabilities or delays, or special healthcare needs. Join me, Greg Austin, the father of an autistic teenager and co-founder of Inclusive Fitness, as we learn together, inspire each other, and create a more inclusive world by building strength, confidence, and community. Today, we're joined by Dr. Heidi Stanish. Dr. Stanish is a professor of exercise science at the University of Massachusetts Boston with expertise in adaptive physical activity. Her research focuses on physical activity and fitness promotion among individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She holds a PhD from Oregon State University in Health and Human Performance, an MS from Dalhousie University in Kinesiology, and a BA from Acadia University. Dr. Stanish has contributed to multiple publications related to physical activity in children and adolescents with disabilities. Dr. Stanish and I discussed today how she became personally interested in the field of adaptive physical activity and fitness, the big trends she has seen emerge over her years researching the space, the challenges and opportunities for neurodivergent people to develop healthy lifestyles, and her hopes for a continuing paradigm shift in how people think about and support driving that positive change over time.
Hello, Heidi. It's so great to have you on our podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is great to have you on, and I'm looking forward to this chat. I've been looking forward to it for a long time because you and I have known each other for at least a year or two, kind of tangentially, when we had one of our first conversations when we were just developing the concepts around inclusive fitness, and you were always so kind to spend time and tell us about what you're doing and provide some guidance. And so I'm excited to dive into you and your work and your passions and your sort of your perspective on what's happening with respect to neuroadaptive and adaptive fitness for our community. So thanks for taking the time today.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. This, full disclosure, first podcast I've done.
Wow, it's an inauguration for you.
It is.
I am shocked because you have so much to say and so much to give, and I'm honored to be that first person.
Good.
Great. So I would love to start off by having you tell me and anybody who's listening about what got you into this space. How did you get interested in it, and how has it evolved over time?
Well, without going too far back, so my field of study we refer to as adapted physical activity, and it's not the first time I've been asked this question because we do find that colleagues of mine, people in this field, often have perhaps a family member or a friend who experiences a disability and they have a special interest in that area. And for me, I do remember as a youngster, my father, who's a sports medicine doctor, an orthopedic doctor, was involved in some disability sport activities in Nova Scotia, where I'm from originally. And he took me as a young person to a center called the Wheelchair Sports Club. And I remember that experience, which, it's funny because there wasn't much sport going on. I remember going to this community center and all these individuals, primarily wheelchair users, adults were there. And I think what struck me was, even as a young person, boy, this is a little uncomfortable for me, but in a really good way. I was like, I sort of like this. I like being here. I'd never, been in a space like that. And that really was a formative time for me, going to meet these adults who were athletes. And then as I went through life,
It was uncomfortable for you. Can you tell me what you mean by that?
yeah, well, I will tell you one thing, even though it was a wheelchair sports club, is that there was a lot of smoking. I remember that the place, but Greg, I think being sort of a minority in a space, my dad brought me and my sister to a space where everyone else in the room experienced a physical disability, a mobility impairment. So as I said, mostly wheelchair users. And that felt like, this is different. I've never outnumbered probably, right? And I was young and they were grown-ups. And so I sort of was like, wow, this is interesting and new. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel that, but I felt curious.
Uh-huh.
And it certainly piqued an interest for me in that I wanted to go back, right? This was something I wanted to do. And so, as a child, I do remember having these perceptions, and I'm going to speak really freely here, Greg, and I hope that's okay. And honesty
That's what we're all about.
with how I've evolved in my emotions is certainly as a little one, as a youngster, probably feeling like I was drawn to people who I perceived as being disadvantaged, right? I sort of had these feelings of, oh, that's too bad, right? I sort of, and certainly my emotions have evolved from there. That sort of like,
Heavy.
definitely, I wouldn't have identified it as that, but yeah, I felt sorry for people. Again, I've, over time you realize that emotion really doesn't get you anywhere, right? That we moved through that, but certainly as a young person, that's how I felt. I was like, oh, that's really sad. I want to help. I want to help these
Yes.
people. And I'll give you
Yes, I
one
know
other
where you're
example.
going with this, man. I'm loving you already. Keep going. This is great.
Yeah, and so I'm always really honest about that because people are like, "Oh, that's pity." I'm like, "It was. It fully was. I didn't know any different, right? But I knew that I wanted to be part of a solution. And another story I often share is I remember as an elementary student on my walk to school, there was a woman, professional woman, with a visual impairment, legally blind, used a cane, and obviously had the same route to work as I had to school. And I'd run ahead from my sister many, many times, and she'd say, "Where are you going?" And I would be running, and I'd say, "I'm going to help the blind lady," right?
Mhm.
Who I would
I'm
come
doing
up
that
behind
lady.
her, and I would grab her arm, right? Which is like totally the wrong thing to do. Say, "Let me help you. Let me help you." And what was really lovely about it is that she allowed me to do that, right? So I thought I was doing this wonderful thing. It made me feel so good about myself at the time. And really, in hindsight, she didn't need my help. She exactly. She was
Yeah.
on her way to work, and she was probably like, this kid comes up behind me and startles me 3 mornings a week and on her way. But, I was sort of compelled in that direction. And then I was always involved in sport myself. And I got to university to my undergraduate degree where I was taking a degree in physical education. And we had a course called Adapted Physical Education. And in that course, we learned all about students with disabilities and how to teach. And we had a practicum experience as part of that class where we had a swim gym program called the SMILE program, which still continues today at Acadia University in Nova Scotia. And I had some one-on-one experiences with some youth with a variety of who experienced a variety of different disabilities. And after that, I said, yeah, I like this. I didn't even know there was such a thing where I could use exercise and sport as a way to kind of promote inclusion. So that's kind of a long story. But after that class, I sort of had a hunch that this was the direction that I was going to go.
Right. I love it. I think that's not an uncommon story. I certainly know that my perception of neurodiversity has evolved, even though I have a son who is autistic, right? And I remember I still have people who say and they meet him, for example, maybe perseverating on something, or it could be some stereotypes going at the store, and they'll say, "Is your son okay?" I say, "Oh, he's autistic." Like, "Oh, I'm sorry." It's like, don't be. He's awesome. He's great. That's who he is. And so but in the past, and what it was more, there was a little bit, I wouldn't say shame, but there was I didn't know quite how to relate to it. And as you get older, you start to realize that they're just people.
Right.
It's like all of us. They just have their things. And so it's neat to hear your evolution. I appreciate you being so open about that, because not everyone is. And so with that in mind, I want to kind of pick up on that thread. How has that perception changed from a sense of, we'll just call it pity, because I'm there with you. I'm there with you. I get it. But how has that evolved from where it was when you were younger and you've dedicated your life to research this very space with this community? What do you see now? How would you frame your perception?
Well, it's certainly changed. Over time, I went on and did my doctoral work in movement studies in out in Oregon, and was just fully immersed in the community, working with adults with a variety of different conditions, multiple sclerosis, and young people, and working with parents and families, and so it was really there when I was again immersed into the community and lots of experiences where you started to realize, this isn't about feeling badly for people. This is about, using again exercise and sport and physical activity to promote inclusion. The neat thing about, and then, since then, 25 years later, oh my gosh, quarter of a century, do as you say, Greg, recognize that, yeah, exactly. That we're all unique and everyone's different. The medium that I use is sport, is physical activity, exercise to try to expose, I guess, my students and people to, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. But, physical activity is the one that I chose because it was close to my heart. Yeah, I mean, now I guess, and this has evolved over time. So there was a time, hey, they're just people. Everybody's different. Everybody's the same. They're more alike than different. People with disabilities, they're a heterogeneous relation. Let's not do an us and them thing, right? And the problem around inclusion continues to swing, right? And it should all be inclusive. Everybody together. Everybody's the same.
Yeah.
And I went through that to realize, like, no, it's okay to be like a person with a certain condition is different, or a person of a different age, or that kind of thing, and that we're not all the same, and that maybe we're not all more alike than different, but we're maybe all. So I've also stopped conforming to, I guess, this idea that everybody needs to be together doing the same thing. Because there was a time in my field of adaptive physical activity that, some of my colleagues and the movement was no, if we think of education, no separate classes, every class, every minute, all the time. If we think of school as one little mini society. And there was that feeling that together all the time, regardless of support needs. To work, I think we're back a little bit to, like, it's okay to have specialized programs that meet the needs, that we need to have options, and that where, the least restrictive environment, right, where someone does best and is supported, that's the best place at this time, but that changes over time.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because I think this debate is still happening. There are philosophical differences that people have with respect to maybe programming that is unique to a particular community. And you certainly see it in housing, and you certainly see it in education. And it's interesting because when we started developing the concept for inclusive fitness, there were people who raised this question, well, is it really inclusive if it's really tailored for a particular mission? And my answer is, anybody can train here. Anybody can train here. We want people to come here, but it is designed specifically for people who have sensory issues. Maybe you have certain preferences or needs for support, and those are going to be different from, let's say, your neurodivergent. Let's honor that, but it doesn't mean you can't work out here. It just means that's what we're for.
Yeah,
and I think your evolution is really interesting. It's this pendulum. It's going to go back and forth. And I think that's fine. But I have, as a father of somebody who's autistic, but also as somebody who's worked with, I think I've trained between 3,000 and 4,000 sessions so far. We need something different sometimes, and that's okay.
It is. And I think there was a time that maybe as we were moving into this space, people thought that it wasn't, right? And we just did some pretty neat work with a physical activity report card in the United States. Some other regions or some other countries across the world did it as well. But looking at national, among other things, national strategies for inclusive sport, inclusive fitness. What are we doing in the U.S. on a national level, government level, to kind of promote? And this was specifically to youth. With a variety, whatever we call them, youth, in our case, in youth with disability. And we acknowledged at the end of that as well, is that, yeah, it's great that that there are strategies or efforts where it says all kids, right? And, the argument is that we mean kids of different socioeconomic status. We mean kids of different races and ethnicities. We mean kids, with disabilities and kids without disabilities. We mean urban kids and rural kids. These efforts are for all kids, or these strategies, but we need some targeted efforts, right? Like, it's one thing to say that. It's very easy to say that, but it's not enough, right? We can't just say that one size fits all, because it never does. And so, your point, I think we want all people to have options, right? I mean, women have options of going to a gym for all women, but they can also go to, yeah.
And think about, for example, the geriatric, which I'm quickly approaching. And you think about the fact that, you do not necessarily need or want to do the same thing with that population when it comes to conditioning programming as you might for somebody who's 20. Is that ageism? No, that's customization. Yeah. That's just meeting them where they are and meeting their needs. So you actually went into an area, I think you're referring to this journal article in the Adaptive Physical Activity Quarterly. This is the one that I was looking at. And I was really interested in your research. And thank you again for sharing the article last night, which I loved. I would love for you to talk a little bit about, over the course of your research and even more recently, and some of the more recent things you've seen, what are some of the big things you've seen with respect to trends in physical education and activity in general for people who are neurodivergent? I know you focus, I think, mostly on children and adolescents. And if you have any perspectives on adults as well, that's great. But what are some of the big things that have really struck you as both good and maybe worrisome?
Good question. That field study and knowledge base is still really emerging. It's in its infancy compared to what we know about physical activity, behavior, and fitness in both children and adults in the general population, for lack of a better term, general population. They've been studied on interventions, on obstacles, on where we are now. People who experience disabilities, I'm using that term, Greg. I know, there's neurotypical and neurodivergent, but I think there's lots of different terms. So I want you to know we're all on the same page. For me to highlight something I wish I could. What I do know is that we've done a better job, to some extent, explaining the disparities in participation in fitness and sport in these populations across age groups, across the lifespan, and working to really understand what contributes to those differences. Why this segment of the population, pediatric, older adults, again, who experience disability, are less across the board, right? Youth sport, adult sport, fitness centers, physical education. So we're learning more about that. And, I think acknowledging that it isn't just about, oh, you have a disability, therefore, of course, you're not physically active, right? But there are some unique obstacles that people face that are different to the general population, right? I mean, everything from perceived competence to knowledge to understanding the importance of health and well-being and fitness to and access to lack of training, service providers. So I think some groundbreaking work has been done there to help us understand what the factors that both inhibit participation and facilitate participation are in this population, which has helped with intervention work. Intervention work has been slow to come, and it's coming now. So we're seeing a lot of efforts to change fitness improvements, change health behaviors in this population. I think there was some fear. Researchers felt that we better not intervene until we fully understand the problem, right? And I actually disagree with that. I think you can partially understand the problem, but the fact that you have a problem means it's time to act, right? We can drive the problem until we're blue in the face, but it is time to act. It doesn't have to be the perfect solution. And so I know you've looked at, a little bit of our work, recognizing that we need work that is programs that are sustained, programs that are that have a sufficient dose. The research in the field, and I know the work in people with intellectual and developmental disabilities better than perhaps sensory impairments or mobility impairments. So I don't want to, I want to stay in my lane. but we deferred a lot to kind of not multi-system approaches, sort of individual level. Hey, if we get people with intellectual and developmental disabilities walking or strength training or what have you, do they gain fitness? Okay, well, that's decades ago. We know that. Why wouldn't they? Right. Why would the response be different? But we still felt like we needed to establish that first. And
Yeah.
now we're seeing a lot more work that is based on theory, like theories of behavior change. So much more rigorous work on, hey, what do we know about behavior change? What have we learned in the general population? Why would it not work in this population? Things around monitoring behavior, things around goal setting, things around social support, all of those things that we know helps, increase the chances of adopting a health behavior. Greg, I think perhaps one of the things, and this is just my own personal perception, that I'm starting to see in the literature that I think is really good, is an increase in expectations. Is
Yes.
that, the work that we're doing is no longer kind of like making assumptions that people aren't bad, or, people are sick, right? That it's like, hey, we can do vigorous training that's long-term and sustainable and use really good objective monitoring. And there were some groundbreaking work in that, some years ago, but I feel like it's, finally catching on. And I know I'm kind of dancing around the question and not really giving you like a, hey, this is what I'm seeing that is making a difference. But there's a lot of work internationally happening here that's far more rigorous and is going to move the needle. And just last thing, and then I'll shut up, but is the other thing we're seeing is with the funding, good funding going toward this research, is the real push to ensure that the work that we're doing is translatable and replicable in the community, and no longer this kind of like, hey, it's sitting up here on a dusty shelf, but what can be used, translational research, like in schools, in communities, that can be used in programming. So
And by
that's
the
what
way,
I'm
we're here because
yeah,
you have
yeah.
a font of knowledge, and everything you're saying completely resonates with my own experience and how we approach our work here. And you hit on some really important things. I'd like to kind of go back on just a couple of minutes. I mean, one of the first things you talked about was the presumption of competence. And I think that's something that is at a tipping point. We're starting to see people, our parents, our caregivers, physicians, start to realize that this community absolutely can do this, and it is vital to their well-being. And it really does work. But then the question is, okay, what is, for example, the right dosage? What is the right consistency? What is the right intensity? What are the right modalities? And that's where I think people, those two issues of presumed competence and what are the right modalities, combined with the systemic issues that, as you mentioned earlier, like transportation, for example, or access, if you're maybe living in not suburbs, but in rural areas or impoverished areas. These systemic issues combined with those other issues of dearth of access and that possibility that somebody could engage. And so I'm kind of curious if you're seeing sort of a tipping point in at least those things we talked about. I mean, as opposed to like we talked about all those poor kids, all that pity, moving to raise the expectations, raise the bar, and then figure out, okay, what am I going to do to address this and make this practical?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that for a minute?
I can. I will say in my time in this field, there's no doubt that physical activity, health, well-being has risen on the agenda. So in terms of funding from, for example, the National Institutes of Health, CDC, funding programming and research that is specific targeting people with disabilities, and because the disparities, for lack of a better word, in participation and access and health and well-being have been consistently and repeatedly given. So that's what it takes, right, to get the government to say, holy, we gotta put some money into this, because it's also costing them money, and in healthcare, et cetera. So I think what is exciting is that it has risen in priority. I mean, it was a big deal to see, disability and health objectives on the Healthy People 2020 or 2030, which is a government initiative. So it's like, hey, this is a population that, needs some support when I mean money and that kind of thing. So I think the tipping point is happening. I think more opportunities. So I'm excited by that. I think seeing more places like your own popping up, and awareness around this relation is really exciting, and not in and in a positive light, not like, wow, these guys are so sick or so obese or have so much chronic disease, but more around, hey, let's create opportunities for all, right? People.
Yes.
And so I think that is happening now.
Mhm.
Much more work needs to be done. I think it needs to start young, right? Because I do have a concern when I'm out with my own children in youth sport opportunities, and I'm not seeing much diversity there in terms of, I'm not seeing any, and I'm going to be careful. I'm not seeing any youth with what I would refer to as an identifiable disability, right? So I'm like, that worries me. Like, where are these kids, right? Why aren't they on this field? Why aren't they at this in this swimming lesson? Now, we talked, Greg, about the need in some cases for some specialized programming. I do a lot of work for Special Olympics International, right? Serving millions and millions of athletes worldwide in both unified and traditional sports. So there may be some places where these youth are, and Boston is like an insane place, right? In terms of hobbies, right? For that, like, we have Pierce Park sailing, we have community rowing, we have, wheelchair basketball programs, there's, skiing, all kinds of things. We have great things at Spalding, for adults. So wonderful opportunities. But I still get concerned that we're not prepared and we're not opening our doors like we could and should. And I think there's no one solution to that. There's a lot of different things that need to happen. I think we need better training. I think we need better outreach. I do think that we need to start young, and we need the schools. I think physical education is still really like the root, like, strong PE, making sure that when young people with different abilities graduate from high school, that we're not just talking about for living, for transportation, for work, but that they know how to recreate, right? Like, where?
I just spoke at the ARC of Massachusetts Transition Conference a couple of weeks ago, and that was my
Right.
whole point: is that we're all here in this transition conference to ensure, or do the best we can to ensure, that our kids are transitioning with respect to location, housing, and social opportunities. But we always seem to leave for last, if that's at best, what happens with their bodies and how they engage their bodies in recreation and in sports and just taking care of themselves and eating well. Because guess what? This body has got to carry us through decades of life, long after we're gone as the parents. And yet it's an afterthought at best. And what does that do to somebody who doesn't have the strength, the stamina, the skills, and the stability to engage in recreation, to engage in a job, to engage in helping around the house? All of these things, it starts here. And I think you're right. We have to start early to make this a priority, because it's becoming more of a problem. Unfortunately, it's not just for people who have a disability. It's across the board.
Absolutely.
Our guys are
Absolutely.
at a
Yeah.
massive disadvantage already, right?
Yeah.
So we always say a rising tide raises all ships. I say also a lowering tide also sinks all ships. That is happening with the
Yeah.
population.
Yeah. There's no doubt that we have physical inactivity as a major issue. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. It was funny. I was on a call this morning with Red Chesson, one of my business partners, and our director of adaptive programming. We were discussing the fact that in America, you either have those who are always in the gym, always exercising, going for bright lights, always doing sport, and then everybody else. And then everybody else is about the 85 to 90% of the population, which is, that's gotten worse and worse over time. And unfortunately, our population, our neurodiverse community, is even more impacted by that from the very earliest days. So we have a few minutes left. I want to respect your time. Two things. If you could empower people who are listening, whether they're parents, practitioners, self-advocates, sort of a wish and even some actions that they could do to support this vision that I think we both share of creating greater access, raising those actions, and producing healthier lifestyles for people who are neurodivergent. What would you share? What would be sort of that one, two, or three things that you would love people to hear you say?
Craig, that's a tough question. That's a really
You're
tough
on, go.
question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's unique to different populations, I guess. So, when I think about current or future professionals in the field of health, like I teach my students, whether you're going to be a nurse or a PT or an OT or a teacher, what have you, um, that being open-minded and not having, I guess, tunnel vision a little bit about how physical activity and sport and exercise can be done, that we can be and should be flexible and creative and open-minded and recognize that activities can be done in different ways, right? And so sports are not sacred, right?
Oh,
So soccer doesn't have to be played with your feet, right? And basketball doesn't have to be played with your hands. And we don't have to play tennis one-on-one over a net, right? We can play it lots of different ways.
I
I
love
think that the first thing is recognizing that and inclusion don't have to look the same for everybody,
yeah.
right? And so, and I think that can be hard for folks. If you're a yoga instructor and someone wheels in to your class, it's immediate. For some might be someone can't do yoga if they're a wheelchair user, right? We
One of that.
sometimes toward the impossibility, right?
Yeah.
How is this possible? How can this be done? You have a child who's a wheelchair user who has, only head and neck movement. They want to play little league baseball. Well, we immediately go to, but they can't, right? They can't hold a bat. They can't strike. They can't run. They can't throw. So it's viewed as an impossibility. And I guess my coaching suggestion, and a parent may think that way too. And the child or the person might say, I can't do yoga. I
Yes.
can't swim.
It becomes a learned profession and behavior that just becomes who you are, which is not necessarily true.
It isn't. And in some cases, adults have been sort of told that, or even if it's not directly told that, it's just like steered away from certain, because the assumption is that someone can't do it in the way it's, and I'm air quoting here, meant to be done. And so I think if we can move away from that and say activities don't always have to look the same, be done by certain rules for people to participate successfully and safely, and that's what my field is about, is how can we modify and adapt any component of an activity, scoring, positioning, space, equipment, time, rules, so that people of all abilities can play together. And for those who are outside of this field, I always use golf as the example, right? Is like, what is the whole idea? And I'm not loving the term handicap in golf, but I get that that's the term. But that was created so that players of different abilities can play together, right? And
Mhm.
can play on a level playing field, so that, when you have a friend who's better than you, you're not always the one buying the beer after the
Yeah,
round.
which wouldn't be me if I played golf.
You share that. So, I guess I would implore to lots of different communities, to people with disabilities themselves, to parents, to service providers, to educators, that let's open our mind to how physical activity and exercise and sport can be done first. And I think, once we do that, then we say, hey, opportunities should be available to all people, and that we can do that. And that's what I say to my students who are exercise and health science majors. I say, I sure hope that you believe so strongly in the importance of exercise and physical activity for everybody that you always go in and say, I don't care what your ability is. This is important, and we're going to find a way to make that happen. So
Amen.
I guess that would probably be my message, and that to look at the possibilities over the impossibilities, and that there are a lot of resources out there that are available to people. And I guess maybe that's what I would say. I don't know.
I
That
think
wasn't
you hit the
very
nail on the head.
fancy.
Fancy, it doesn't matter. I did a podcast with Dr. Naomi Gothier from Children's Hospital. She runs the exercise physiology and congenital heart disease department there. And she said, this is all about what's possible and creating possibility and helping people find their possible. And so you and she and I think so many people who are at the, hopefully, the leading edge of that tipping point, if I may mix my metaphors, are seeing that is probably one of the fundamental and also opportunities to drive change, is that paradigm shift and realizing that this is possible, it's vital, and it really does work. It does improve the quality of life on so many dimensions, not just the physical, right? And I would say the same thing to people who are self-advocates themselves. You may have been told, or may have, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, that you can't do this, or this is not for you, or maybe your personal experiences led you to believe this, which would be understandable. It's not true just because that's been your experience or what you've been told. And we see it every day here. I know you see it as well.
Yeah, we definitely, it is a paradigm shift for all individuals involved. Other participants, maybe if someone's playing on a sports team or in a gym like yours, or one that different than yours, is making sure that it's increasing awareness and acknowledging the benefits, as you said, of this for so many components of someone's life, so many domains. I say that to my students. I'm like, boy, did we ever pick the right you picked the right field, I said, because there's nothing like physical activity it benefits so many domains. But you're absolutely right, Greg, is that, or everything you just said. I don't want to repeat what you said, but it's an exciting time, and with those change of perceptions, and I do still think that we need to start younger, because the more that people are exposed and that people expect more of themselves, that parents expect more, that the community more, I don't know if that's the right term, but that we acknowledge the importance of this for people of all abilities, and that we create those opportunities, whether they're separate or whether they're inclusive or in whatever way, is really how we're going to get where we're going. And it is a paradigm shift, and I think it's happening. But as you said earlier, I think we need everybody to first and foremost, acknowledge and hopefully embrace the importance of movement, and what that brings to us. And that's hard to do. People, it's hard to do. People have a lot going on, and I'm, not to go off on another tangent, but I myself, it's when I get busy, the first thing we somehow think is okay to set aside. It's busy, right? I need to sit at my desk a little longer. And so we still have some work to do there, but we're getting there, and work like yours and centers like yours are really moving us in the right direction.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you, I see the doorway. I got this from Kristen and from my business partner. We have the best job on the planet. We're not fixing people. We're not curing people. We're not saying we're speaking awesome people. We're strong. We're awesome. And that's an absolute blast. Sometimes it's hard. It's always rewarding. And I just want more people to see it and to realize what's possible. So my last mission for you, and then we'll let you go, is I know you're a researcher at heart. It's clear you're also somebody who cares about where is this going? How is this helping change things? Where are you turning your attention, maybe in your next research effort?
Well, it's funny, because I'm in a little, not entirely a pause. We're still collecting some data. I'm working very closely with the research and evaluation team at Special Olympics International to do some data, but I am starting to think that there's been some really good research done by myself, by my colleagues, by lots of people all over the world, and that as I head into the next phase of my career, it's not that I'll cease doing research, but what I'd really like to do is start taking some of the great work that's been done and using it.
All right.
So, looking at some of this great intervention work, we did a really nice study called Team Up for Fitness, where we did some partnering of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities with partners in gyms, where it was simple workout buddy model, and and it was great. And I'm like, why aren't we running a Team Up for Fitness program in the community based on our work and the findings and what we learned from that? So,
Yeah.
and then we can do some good program evaluation around that and publish it and look at sustainability and replicability and different pieces. So I think my next is going to be a little bit more of that, is taking a look at what our team has done, but what others have done, and letting it rip, in the
Mhm.
community, and doing some more evaluation of that work in the community, as opposed to, and that may lead to some new intervention ideas that will need to be rigorously tested. But right now, I think that some really cool stuff has been done that needs maybe some further applicability in communities or schools. So that's where I think I'm going, and maybe do some evaluation of that work.
Well, I can always say if there were just a potential partner who would love to work with you on that, I would think that'd be great.
Great.
Wait a minute. Oh yeah, this
Yes,
is
yes.
we're open for business.
Great.
Heidi Stanish, Dr. Heidi Stanish. Such an absolute pleasure to have you on. And you just set us up for our next podcast down the road to see how you're doing in terms of taking this to the mat. And as you said, your commitment to the space, that the research you've done, and just your passion around this. And now, as you said, in this next phase, your desire to make it something that becomes practical it touches my heart. It inspires my brain, and I know that so many people are going to benefit from what you're doing and already have been. So thank you for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.